So we have two incredible intellectuals and writers who are joining us today. And what I especially love is that they're not especially, not just accomplished writers and very erudite, but they've also very much long time Gen X members, both of them. Jack Carr is a father. He is a husband. His marriage and his family survived many deployments when he was a Navy SEAL, and a pretty impressive Navy SEAL at that. I mean, they all are, but Jack especially stood out. He's a team leader, platoon commander, troop commander, task unit commander, and just an incredible leader. He, in the early days, I think in his experience with Gen X, before he was a published author, he would come do quite a bit of talks with our community on leadership. And so he has a number of bestsellers, 3 of them now, kicked off with The Terminal List, and Chris Pratt has bought the rights to the book, and they're coming out with the series in Amazon, which is quite cool. We're going to talk about the story of the book and the themes of these books. Also, Michael McClellan, also father, and a very committed patriot. And he has a little Michael McClellan trivia. In over 100 years of history at Yale, he was the first freshman quarterback to start on the team. And so he's a fighter. He'll take the hits, he'll throw the ball, he'll get on the field. But he's also an extremely accomplished lawyer. I know a number of members who have hired him, and he's quite aggressive and persuasive. I sort of always imagine him in sort of the House of Commons during Prime Minister's question time, just really leading the charge in the cause of liberty for his clients. And he's also written a book called The Sand Sea. It is I think it's fair to say it's a masterpiece. And both Michael and Jack have met through, they both sort of entered the literary arena through Stephen Pressfield. And which I love to see him, mentoring people, especially people who are in our community. So we're just gonna have a conversation with them. And so please be ready. I presume that all of you have read the books. And if you haven't, you're in for a really wild ride. So first, I think let's start with Jack. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of the story, and the quick snippet of what type of assassin James Reese is, or patriot, depending on your point of view?
Yeah, that's the real question right there. Is assassin, a soldier, an intelligence operative, a hunter? What is he, and what's he going to be going forward? So those are some of the questions that I explore in all 3 novels, and now the 4th that I'm working on now. But just by way of background, this is something I wanted to do my entire life. Both serve my country in the military, specifically in the SEAL teams, and then write fiction in this genre, because as you can tell from the books behind me, I've been a lifelong reader, and most of them have survived along with me from like 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and on. So these shelves go like 3 deep back there. But in the 80s, when I was growing up, I learned a lot about the military and intelligence agencies from the pages of fictional thrillers by guys like Tom Clancy, Nelson DeMille, A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock, David Morrell, guys like this who had protagonists with backgrounds I wanted to have one day in special operations. So I loved reading those. My mom was a librarian. I grew up surrounded by books, and I was also reading nonfiction. I was reading works on warfare, terrorism, insurgencies, counterinsurgencies, just trying to educate myself so I could be the best operator I could be when I got into the SEAL teams. So as I was getting out, all that came together at one time. That experience from Iraq and Afghanistan as a SEAL, all those books I read growing up in the thriller genre, all the academic study of warfare, and it all ended up weaving into the storyline of my novels. So that's a little bit of the background of how I got here. And then for that first one, The Terminal List, which is the one that Chris Pratt optioned for the Amazon series, I knew I had to come out of the gate with something that was hard hitting, that was visceral, that was primal, because I knew Simon & Schuster saw thousands of these things every year. And so something had to make this stand out. And that theme of revenge without constraint, is really something that resonated with me growing up in both books and movies. So that's really what I wanted to explore. And it was very clear to me that that was the first book that I was going to write, The Terminal List. So I came out of the gate with that one. There's some other themes we can discuss a little later on, but as by way of background, that's the Cliff Notes version.
I love it. I'm going to come back a little bit to the storyline. I have some questions about it. Michael, though, please talk to us about your journey, the story of the story.
Well, Michael, thank you. And first, it's a huge honor to be on here with Jack Carr. I started listening to one of his books on Audible recently, and it's phenomenal. A lot of you, a lot of Gen Next members have been with me on this journey. I mean, my forum mates, bless them. Many of you listened to my updates on the writing journey for like a decade. Probably wondering if I was ever going to finish. The story of the Sand Sea, for me, is a little bit similar with Jack in the sense that I've wanted to combine two things since I was a little kid, and that is I grew up reading tons of history. I was the guy who asked for like Civil War battlefield books from my aunts and uncles when I was 10 years old. And they would ask my parents, like, is he kidding? Is he for real? Does he really want these for Christmas? And they said, yeah, he'll read them. The other thing was I grew up reading big books like Lord of the Rings, the ones that transported you to another place and sort of didn't let you go. And even though you had to wake up early the next morning, you stayed up reading. And so as I progressed on my history journey, I was increasingly attracted to the first era of globalization, which is basically the era from the end of the American Civil War in 1865 to the Guns of August of 1914, when the First World War began. And so what I realized was that no one had written a sort of Lord of the Rings scope epic set in that era, that first era of globalization. So the peak of the British Empire, the Wild West, Gilded Age, America, Transcontinental Railroad. And this was a time when the world was coming together as it had never come together before, based upon new technologies, the steam engine, the telegraph, the railroad, et cetera. And you have, in this era, you have the clash of civilizations. So you have armies all over the world, whether it's the Zulus in South Africa, whether it's the Mahdi of the Sudan, whether it's the Boxers in China, fighting back against a technologically empowered and increasingly aggressive Western imperialism. And so for me, the theme of that era was always very compelling to me, which was the heroism of those on the ground, both from the native cultures that were being advanced upon, and also upon those that were sort of thrust into these situations by often self-interested and acquisitive and sometimes very greedy governments back in places like London or Berlin or Paris or Brussels or even sometimes Washington, D.C. And so I thought that the exploration of the hero's journey in that context, aka the acquisition of character by moving from order into chaos and then emerging as something better and more important, would be explored well in that era. And so Stephen Pressfield, who is one of my literary heroes, encouraged me to embark on this journey back in 2008 when I was still in my 20s. I'm 41 now, so it's been a long journey, and we can get into how that happened and sort of what that took to get it done, having a day job, et cetera. But that's the semi-short answer.
I like it. You both, Jack, I have sort of a blunt question for you that I've never really been able to ask. In the terminal list, I mean, it's a list of people he's killing, right? Enemies of the state, enemies of him. It's a book about vengeance in many ways. You were able to describe in graphic detail that process of killing a human being. What kind of research did you do for that? Because it's pretty uncomfortable to read at times.
Yeah, well, the research was really done for me over 20 years in the SEAL team. And I think that's one of the things that really made it resonate with Simon & Schuster, with Emily Bessler, who's my editor, who is also Vince Flynn's editor, is Brad Thor's editor. So she's the one person that I wanted to publish this novel and be my editor. Like she was my target. But when I first sat down, I thought that this was just going to be a great adventure that someone pulled off the shelf at Hudson News as they got on the plane to fly to vacation. And then as soon as I sat down and started writing, I realized that it was going to be a much more personal experience than I anticipated at the outset. That it was going to also be a very therapeutic experience. Not that my experiences downrange were horrible. I was very fortunate in many respects, but I got to revisit those past experiences and then use them to move forward and to transition out of the SEAL teams and into the private sector, doing something that I loved and that I knew I wanted to do from a very early age. So it wasn't me sitting down with a SEAL sniper and saying, hey, what did it feel like to go into Ramadi in 2006 at the height of the war? And then listen to that story and then filter it through whatever preconceived notions I had as an author or biases I had as a human, as my past experience, whatever that might have been, and then apply that to a fictional narrative. No, it was me remembering what it was like to go in there at the height of the war and to sneak into the city and to go into a house and set up a sniper hide site and do all that stuff and then extract the next day for whatever. Anyway, so I got to revisit all that stuff and then just put it right onto the page without any of those filters. So it ended up being a very therapeutic experience. And I think that's why it stood out because the emotions and the feelings are raw, they feel real, and that's because they are, because even though the story is fiction, the feelings behind everything the protagonist feels comes from a real place, comes from something that I experienced downrange. And so I think that's out to Simon & Schuster, and I think that's what's really resonating with readers and making these novels stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, I love it. A similar question, Michael, and then I want to shift to diving a bit more into the themes of the book, because I think that that's probably part of the most remarkable thing about it. But Michael, you create these lands and times. What was your creative process to do that? Like, were you doing mushrooms? Like what? How'd you go about getting?
Michael, that's a secret.
Yeah, right.
For me,
growing them in your garden.
Yeah, right. For me, I realized that in order to make the fantasy component accessible, so mine is an alternate world that mirrors our world in the 19th century. And so I realized that in order to, because remember, most fantasy fiction is set in like a medieval age, right? And there's some steampunk, there's other stuff, but most of it's set, think of Game of Thrones. Right, it's set in an alternate medieval age that we all sort of understand, right? Swords and dragons and knights in armor and all that kind of thing. So to set fantasy fiction in the late 19th century, that's closer history, right? And those themes are closer, right? This is post-Civil War America. So it's not that far away. And so what I realized I had to do is I had to make the periphery of the book, the quasi-North American and European components, quite familiar, both geographically and in terms of power structures and in terms of some politics and just the general feel and energy, in order to be able to go deeper into the fantasy in the mythical or fictionalized East. And so what I did in creating the components of the Sand Sea, aside from creating some very, very different geography, in terms of a Kilimanjaro-sized mountain in the center of a Sahara-sized desert in the middle of a Eurasian-style continent with a Nile-type river flowing out of it. What I did was I pulled some elements that I had studied long ago of the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire in Iran, the Gunpowder Age, back in sort of Renaissance era when these empires were very, very powerful and very, very frightening to the Europeans, whether it was the Holy Roman Empire or the Venetians or the Spanish or the Portuguese, etc. And so I pulled those old elements forward into the late 19th century. And because of that, it allowed, similar to what Jack said, if it feels real, if it suspends the disbelief, it's because a lot of it is based on real history. And so, when I think of, Otto von Fanfar, who's one of my favorite characters, who's the famous Demissary commander, he's based upon the concept of the Ottoman Janissaries, right? Who were Christian boys that were basically taken from modern day Yugoslavia or the Balkans or Greece forcibly converted to Islam, and then they were basically the most feared warriors in the world at the time, and they fought with, limited armor, etc. And so there's a lot of those, for those that deeply study history, there's a lot of those Easter eggs, for lack of better words, inside of the book. But it's also, Pressfield taught me something very, very important, which is, remember, Michael, that the research must always serve the story, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. I love that. All right. One other question of a bridge with the question about what was a formative moment for both of you? Either a moment where you felt down, discouraged, it could have been Jack when, maybe you were super pumped up and inspired. For Jack, it might be when you sent me the draft and I gave you thoughtful edits. That could have been a formative moment for you.
That was probably the one.
It's a big one. It's a big one. But it's an incredible undertaking. I mean, to write a book and create this world. Is there a peak moment for you where you thought either you were very discouraged or you felt very pumped up, and what were the circumstances surrounding that?
Yeah, so I never really felt discouraged, and because I thought of this when I was a little kid. When you're a little kid, you don't know that you can't do anything. You're 7, 8, 9, 10. You think, at least I did. I thought I could do anything I wanted, and I just had to apply myself. And if I didn't succeed, it was going to be all on me. So my whole life, I always knew, okay, SEAL teams, boom. Okay. That's about all the thought that I gave that. That's what I'm going to do. What do I need to do to get there? I'm going to study warfare and I'm going to get in shape. Like, those are the two things when you're 10, 11, 12 years old that you're going to do if you want to take that path. Same thing for writing. I knew that one day after my time in the military, I would write books like these ones that I was enjoying so much growing up. I didn't think about how hard it was or what the odds are of being able to get published by a New York publishing house, or I just thought, for sure, I'm going to be published by a major publishing house in New York, and then an A-list star is going to option the film and make this thing. So, and it'll be a series, and it'll be very successful, and it'll make the New York Times list. Like, I just thought all those things from such an early age that there wasn't. I never really thought that there was another option other than just, okay, yeah, I guess there's always another option over here, but I'm not going to focus on that. All my energy is going to go into writing the best novel that I possibly can, and then getting it where it needs to go. So, but one of the seminal moments, other than you reading a first draft and getting back to me with very helpful comments that made this post-military life possible, was when I got a call from Brad Thor, the author who writes in this genre, and someone had connected us. And actually, I took my first call with him when I was at Patau up in LA at Terranea Resort, and I had a call set with him, and I needed to find someplace quiet, and so I went to the far corner of this parking lot, and the sun was just beating down on my car, and I couldn't have the engine on because on the cell phone I want to take notes, and I'm just sweating everywhere, and I still have the notes from that call. It was amazing, and now that we're friends, he's told me that he thought that, he'd send it to New York if I ever finished it. And then they'd be like, hey, what do you want me to tell this guy? And he'd say, just give him some encouraging advice. And then that was it. And instead, they loved it and called him and said, hey, Brad, what do you want us to do? You're our political thriller guy. And he said, hey, I want you to publish Jack, which is just don't publish him in the same month as me. That's what he said.
Wow.
He called me. So the seminal moment was I'm in Texas driving along, and I get this call, says Brad Thor, and I pull over, and he says, you've been struck by lightning. They want to publish you. So that was probably,
wow.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest moment.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Michael.
And
please share that you actually wrote every single day, whether you were tired.
I'll hit that. So look, I think there's 3 seminal moments for me. The first was in September of 2008. I was having dinner with Stephen Pressfield down with a bunch of family in Orange County in Corona del Mar. And, like my Greek grandma was there, et cetera, because she was a fan of Gates of Fire. And she's like speaking Greek to Pressfield. It was amazing. And that night, I told Steve about this idea. And initially I had sort of said, with humility, maybe Steve, you should consider writing, a book about, Churchill and the River War, et cetera. And he drove back Malibu where he lives, and he sent me this email that night, late, and the email was titled "Tattooed on Your Brain," and it basically said, I've talked to a lot of people in my life, Michael. I've heard a lot of ideas. I've looked into a lot of faces as they told me their ideas. He said that the spark inside of you on this is one that if you don't embrace it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. And so basically he said, everything else I have to say is in the war of art, but functionally never surrender until you're done, until you've defeated resistance and finished this project. And I had absolutely no idea at that time that it would take 12 years. And so I started out, and I was like a weekend warrior, right? I would work all week in the law practice. And then I would, go out into my garoffice, not this garoffice, but a previous garoffice when we had a different house. And I would work for like 7-8 hours. And my wife would get really mad at me because I would be out there for a long time, and I'd come back with like 1 page of work. And she's like, "What on earth were you doing out there?" I was like, "I was researching." She's like, "Stop researching, start writing." So in January of 2014, January 13th, 2014, was the fundamental watershed moment. Okay, if this war of art was the Civil War, this was the Gettysburg, Vicksburg moment, right? That important. And that was that we had a death in the family. One of my younger cousins, Matthew Nichols, had died on New Year's Eve. And that reminded me that life is not a dress rehearsal. And that if you want to do something, you need to do it. You don't get to wait. And so that was the day, January 13th, 2014, that I started writing 500 words a day, every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which I still do to this day. And that includes Christmas Day. That includes the day my youngest daughter, Violet, was born. That includes, a day I have a particularly awful day at the office, whatever it is, there's no exceptions. And in the early years, that was at 5:05 a.m. And that was what it took to write a book of this magnitude. With everything that's in it. So that's a second. The final moment was in December of 2016. I was talking to one of my closest friends at work, Paul Tetzloff, who's now our managing partner. And he said, he's a Marine veteran, officer in the Marine Corps, Afghan war vet, et cetera. And we're very close. And he said, "Mike, what's going on with your book?" I said, "I'm still working on it every day." And I had a little bit of, I don't know if you guys all know the movie Back to the Future, but I had a little bit of George McFly in me, right? Which was like, my writing was never going to be good enough to actually share with the world. What if they say it's no good? I'm not sure I could handle that kind of rejection, right? That kind of ridiculousness. So he said, he said, "Show me a little bit." And so I showed him a little excerpt, and he said, "Look, I don't know anything about anything, okay?" He said, "But I think this is really good." And he said, "I think you need to share it with Steve. I think it's time." And I said, I don't know. And I remember putting together that I emailed Steve. I said, "Steve, I'd like to share some of my real writing with you," because I had done some nonfiction stuff with him, articles and whatnot, but never my real stuff. And he said, "Okay, fine. Send me 25 pages and I'll give you my honest feedback." And so I did. And I remember putting that in the FedEx package, sending it to his house. And it was one of the most frightening moments of my life, because it was like, this is it. Like, this is the real moment. And this could determine a lot. And he emailed me back like a couple days later, and first he emailed me, said, "Okay, I'm going to take a couple days to read this. So don't interpret my silence as anything other than that it's taken me a little bit to read it." And then he sent me that email that you always dream of, right? Which is like, this is great. He's like, "I knew it would be detailed and thoughtful, but this, you have the spark, you have the real thing. And I'd like to introduce you to Sean Coyne, who became my editor, and then through StoryGrid, and his partners actually became my publisher as well." So those are the 3 watershed moments. And I'm sorry for the very long answer.
I'm thinking about these scenes, Jack, you had a couple that were just heart-wrenching with James and his families and loved ones, and then another that make you just very nervous, and the amount of sort of violence, clarity of violence. And then Michael, I remember being able to create these worlds and these epic battle scenes. And there's a scene in the train car where they're flirting, and it was like it flowed so naturally. And just to think of these scenes lighting up a page, and yet you guys have all these stories of all the effort and people that intervened for those to light up the page. It's really incredible. I'm getting a couple questions directly. Jack, we're going to get to a question toward the end about the review process, because that's a point of issue for you to talk about extremism. And before I hand it off to Brian and Jack, I want to ask a question about what are the themes of, what are you trying to motivate the reader to believe? What are you trying to rally, to motivate the reader to rally around? What's that substack? What's the principle that you're trying to convey? Jack, if you could go first.
Yeah, there's a few, because there's so many different little subsections, like you mentioned, and different people are going to get different things out of it. And that was at the forefront of my mind as I started writing, is that, hey, this is commercial fiction. People need to buy this. And so it needs to speak to a few different people on a few different levels, depending on how they want to read it or depending on their past experience. So yeah, at its base, a level of revenge without constraint. That's what it is. And so I had a little yellow sticky, and I got this from Stephen Pressfield, even though now he's told me that I misinterpreted what he said. I'm glad I did. And it was him on the Rogan podcast when he said that, or what I thought he said was that he would have a one-word theme for his novels on the side of his typewriter as he was writing. And I was like, oh, brilliant. And so I did that. I wrote revenge on a yellow sticky on my computer. Now that I know Stephen Pressfield, he was telling a story about a playwright who would write a one-sentence theme for his plays next to his typewriter. But that's neither here nor there now. It worked out. And so everything that I did, whether it was a paragraph, a sentence, a chapter, whatever it was, had to directly, or more importantly, indirectly lead back to that theme of revenge. Second one was a novel, really of redemption. Third one was all about exploring the dark side of man through the hunter-hunted dynamic. And this fourth one that I'm working on now really explores the legality, ethics, and morality behind targeted assassinations. So, but deeper than just the revenge theme, which resonates with people, I think, because you get to, because in real life, if you did these things, you'd go to prison. But if you sit down in a movie, you can see kind of that underdog do things that you can't do in real life. You can't do if you don't get that promotion at work, or for whatever happens. You can't do some of the things you might want to do or say even. But in a movie, in a book, you can have that same type of experience. So I think that's why that resonates with people. But deeper than just the revenge, it really was about a guy who comes back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, brings those tactics, those techniques that work so well against us downrange, and brings those to home soil. And a little deeper, it's about a veteran of those wars who brings them to the home front, to the front doors of people who have been sending young men and women to their deaths for close to 20 years now. So for me, it was a very therapeutic process in that we have a lot of senior leadership, both military and civilian, that really don't understand the nature of the conflict in which we're engaged. And have made a lot of bad decisions that if we had made those types of decisions tactically, meaning going into a specific house for a specific person, if we had made some poor decisions there, we would be kicked out of the military, court-martialed, never operate again. But at these senior levels of leadership, they can make horrible decisions up here with zero consequences, other than promotions, other than seats on different boards. So a lot of that comes through in the writing as well. If you know me, interviews, well, that flows through all the novels as well.
So accountability is a big theme. Michael, you actually quote. I've seen a lot of on like social media, people quoting you, but you're quoting Lenin. Where and I think the Lenin quote is, what is it? There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And you modify this. What are can you play that out in terms of your theme? Why in the world are you quoting Lenin? What are you getting at? Are you trying to make a commentary about the rise of Marxism and conflict theory in America, or is there something else?
I think I like messing with people a little bit, so that's a fun Easter egg that's in there. Lenin's quote, of course, was there are decades when nothing happens and there are days when decades happen. And so in the prologue, in the beginning, when there's this individual, and we know that he's recently died, and it's his wife who's old, very old, in her 90s, and she's talking to her daughter, who's a grandmother herself, and they're trying to write the eulogy. And we know that there are people that want to tear this man's statue down, and we don't know why, but we can suspect that it's because he's out of the times. And so they're in his office, and there's sort of the hint of cigar smoke and lots of books on the shelves, and we know that it's sort of a beautiful home. And it sort of evokes a little bit of, I don't know if anyone on the call has ever been to Winston Churchill's home, Chartwell, in the Weald of Kent, on the border of Surrey, south of London. But his study is sort of, a little bit what I was envisioning when I was writing this scene. It's one of my favorite places. And William Manchester's writing in Alone on The Last Lion, the second volume of The Last Lion, he talks about Chartwell and that study in particular. But what they are looking at is they're trying to figure out how to write his eulogy, and the mom's saying to the daughter, you're not ready, there's things you don't know. And so they go to his desk, they pull out this pith helmet, and they pull out this manuscript, and they open it up. And there's a line in there that says, there are centuries in which nothing happens, but there are years in which centuries happen. Say what you will about the events of 1879, but I can tell you, for I was there, the things their prophecy predicted all came true, but not in the way that any of them had imagined. And so I think, Lenin, despite being one of the most evil people in human history, who I detest with every bone in my body, was onto something, that there are fundamental moments that change the world. And I think in some ways 2020 is a tumultuous year that I think we will look back upon and remember as historically significant. And I think I wanted to set up the context of the very large narrative, because remember, someone's going on a 750-page, 285,000-word journey in the Sand Sea. I wanted to set up the concept that this is a historically very significant year. And we end the prologue by saying that I almost just had a bad reveal, that an individual is going to be a very important historical figure, and that 1879 was the year that helped make this person very significant.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to go to Jack Kennedy and then Brian Ferguson, and then I got some more questions that are going to ping to me directly. Jack, please.
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate you guys being here and the work you've done. And I think this could probably go to either of you, but given the commitment you make when you sit down, and Michael, in your case, almost, a decade or more, and Jack, every time you pick up the pen, are you ever bothered by the notion that the subject matter you're going to write about, and Jack, I'm guessing the answer for you is going to be no based on what you said, but that the subject matter you might be writing about might be too controversial or appeal to too narrow an audience to be worth the effort you're going to put into it? I can't imagine how you could, but I'm just curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it other than, hey, there's already an audience out there that likes these kind of books. I'm one of them. First and foremost, I'm a reader. My research started back in, second, third, fourth, fifth grade as I was reading young adult fiction, and then transitioned about fifth grade into what my parents were reading. And then for sure by sixth grade, what my parents were reading with the Tom Clancy's and Ludlums and all the things that they were reading then. And then discovering what I really liked. With Brotherhood of the Rose by David Morrell was a seminal book for me, where he created the character Rambo back in 1972. And with Brotherhood of the Rose, he took some of the best elements of UK spy fiction, so the Le Carré side of the house, and then some of the best elements of US spy fiction, like the Ludlum side back then, and combined them together in Brotherhood of the Rose and moved the genre forward. So for me, I always wanted to move that ball forward, maybe whether it's by a degree or a little, but always moving that ball forward, contributing to the genre, kind of like guys that like Richard Connell did with the novella, his short story, The Most Dangerous Game, like Jeffrey Household did in 1939 with Rogue Male. So like David Morrell did with First Blood in 1972, like all these guys have moved the genre forward, and I wanted to be a part of that lineage, having been a student of it for so long. So when I sit down, it's really about choosing. For me, I have all these different ideas, and when I sat down to do this initially, I wrote down 6, 7, 8 different ideas, and I chose the one that I thought was going to be the most primal and hard-hitting out of the gate. But all those other ones are now turning in to these next stories. So I don't think I'll ever worry about what I'm going to write about. It's more at this stage about not just the writing, but also about the business side of the house. So this is really a startup. And I thought when I started this journey that all you did was write, like in a cabin in the mountains, and you sent it off to New York, maybe you did a little editing, and that was it. And then you started the next one. I didn't realize you had to do all the things you would have to do with any small business, and all the branding and the marketing and the co-branding, the advertising, the budgets, all social media, the engagements, brand building, everything that you would have to do if you were starting a coffee shop or anything else, you have to do as a writer if you want to build a readership. And of course, there's some exceptions, those one-offs but for most of us, you have to build a business, build a base of readers through engagement and through these platforms that weren't available to authors 20, 30, 40 years ago. So when I sit down, there's definitely, I'm never like, what am I going to write about today? It's always, get after it.
God, it's so incredible. I mean, I remember looking at just your website mock-ups and stuff, and now here you got a series with Chris Pratt. Michael, anything for you?
I'll answer it fast. Look, I don't remember who said it, but someone said, write what only you can write. And people have said to me, they said, look, what made you think you could do this, right? Conventional wisdom says you start with short stories, and then you move on to short novels. And then maybe once you've had some success with those, you move on to something really big, some giant epic story like this. And for me, it wasn't about like wanting to be a successful author or writer. It was about, I had this vision that the books that I loved, the books that had moved me, that had transported my soul to a different place, were books like Clavel, right? Shogun, Noble House, and all those books are like that big. Some of the Michener novels that my grandpa used to read, Lord of the Rings, the Game of Thrones series when it came out. I mean, I devoured that thing, and I was grogging in so many morning meetings because it was 2 a.m. and I said I can read one more chapter, and I did. And for me, it was just it was wanting to write that story in my own way that combined Oscar Wilde and Gore Vidal and Henry James and Edith Wharton and like those like social kind of like late 19th century, early 20th century novels, with like the warfare of Michael Shara about Gettysburg or Stephen Pressfield's Gates of Fire. And sort of, if you combined those two things and then turned it into a Lord of the Rings of the 19th century, that doesn't exist. And my sense was, if I was on fire about it, if I was fired up on it for years, and it was exciting enough to me that it could keep me showing up every day writing 500 words a day, that at some point it would find friends, that there would be other people that would feel the same way. And I don't think the book's for everybody, but I have been surprised and thrilled with the diversity of folks that have found the book accessible and enjoyable.
Thank you. Love it. And Michael, just going back really quick to what I was saying about the, obviously I'm very passionate about that accountability piece at our senior levels of leadership in this country. And I think I saw Brian Ferguson actually mention this one, but the Generals by Tom Ricks explores this theme in great detail, in only the way that he can, with that little bit of tinge of cynicism in there. And then Supreme Command, Elliot Cohen, absolutely another fascinating one that explores the same theme. And then I was looking on my bookshelf, and it's there somewhere, but it's another one by H.R. McMaster called Dereliction of Duty, about the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Johnson administration and that relationship during Vietnam. So those three books are a good pairing if you're interested in that sort of thing and wondering why senior military leaders and civilian leadership seem to just get promoted out of bad decisions, and those at the tactical level die.
Mm. Oh, wow. Brian, you're unmuted.
So Jack and Michael, just extraordinary respect and reverence for the creative process that you guys have brought to life. I don't know what the statistics are on people who are quote unquote writers who actually become best-selling authors and sell books, but it's awesome. I'm fascinated, like maybe for everyone on this call, whether they're in business or whatever they do, of adopting systems that allow us to take in all this information and synthesize it. So I'm a huge fan of Ryan Holiday and his process of note taking that he learned from Robert Greene. And I heard David Brooks once talk about his own process where he gets all these note cards and he organizes them into a book. But both of your works there's these complex stories, and Michael McClellan, especially in The Sand Sea, like the amount of characters, and you're trying to parallel that to a historical period of time. Would love for you guys to just briefly talk about I'm always hungry for systems and organizing information, how you guys took that complexity and put it into something that is so clear as a story arc.
I'd like to hear from Jack first, because I might learn something.
All right, I can definitely jump in. So I'm constantly refining that process. I'm still very, very new to this. So at the beginning, I just did what came naturally. Now I read a couple books about writing and that sort of thing, but I didn't spend too much time on that because I knew that I could read those kind of books forever and never actually sit down and do the work. So I read all of Stephen Pressfield's books on creativity, which are right here, The War of Art. If you haven't read that one, you should probably start with that one. But there's a whole series on creativity here. I read, of course, David Morrell's The Successful Novelist. I read Stephen King's On Writing. So I read those ones, and then I put them aside and I kept them within view as I started writing. So they were right behind my computer. And so I had them, just that energy right there. And then I had that little yellow sticky on my computer. But what I did was I took the idea, essentially what would be on the jacket of a book cover, just a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs describing the book. And then I took that and turned it into an outline. And my outline was robust enough, but not so much so that I would get stuck on something if I couldn't figure it out. If I got to a certain place in that outline and I thought, what am I going to do here? The reader's never going to believe this. I don't know how I'm going to fix this. I would just go on. I'd just go around that obstacle, go through it, and knowing that over the next year, I'd figure that out. I would solve that problem, just like we do on the battlefield. Like we're solving problems very aggressively. Well, here I can do that, but I have time. And the consequences of jacking it up are not nearly that of messing up on the battlefield. So I took that approach to it. As I figured those problems out, then I would go back to that outline and change it, add to it. And so I had a visual representation of that story arc. I also was introduced to Joseph Campbell very early on in life in 1988 when he did a series of interviews with Bill Moyers on PBS called The Power of Myth. My mom introduced me to that, and then I read Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is pretty much his seminal work, and then a series of books from those Bill Moyers interviews also called The Power of Myth. So I knew about that hero's journey, and I was fascinated by that because back in that PBS interview, they applied the hero's journey to Star Wars and had some samurai elements in there. So I was enthralled with that, but I was very cognizant of the fact that this hero's journey has resonated with people across cultures for a very long time, and I applied those elements to the novel. So as far as getting more efficient going forward and changes, my third novel, I used a program called Scrivener, which allowed me to pull in research rather than like trying to remember what website I was on for something or what book that was in. You can pull them into the chapters, and so you have these, it organizes it a little better for you. It worked great for book 3, but the one I'm in now, I started off with Scrivener and outlined the whole thing there. And then for some reason, it just didn't click in Scrivener. So I went back to Word, and it's working out great just doing it in Word. So as far as process goes, I'm always thinking about how I can be more effective, more efficient going forward, how I can save a little time here and there, especially juggling 3 kids and everything else that we're dealing with in our household. But that's pretty much the basics, and everybody does it differently. I know Kyle Mills, who writes the Vince Flynn novels now, he does a very robust outline. So really all he's doing is changing those into full sentences when he's done with the outline. So the majority of his work is spent on the outline. For me, that's not the case, but I do have a 1-page executive summary. I do have an outline, and then I start writing.
Michael.
My answer is that I think about it in terms of art and architecture. To me, the art is constructing individual scenes and chapters. And so for me, in order to, the critical thing, right, is for the reader to forget that you exist, right? You got to suspend the disbelief so that it's just them and the page, and McClellan has vanished, and it's just, what is Bazadak going to do here in the moment, and or whoever else it is. And so for me, I try to make all other things vanish for me when I'm writing a scene. So I'm playing a videotape functionally in my mind of what I'm seeing, and then I try to deploy that for the reader in all of the various components, right? And it's specific details properly deployed that make something feel real, right? It's a certain tilt of the head, or it's the potted plant in the corner, or the deer head shot by his grandpa Bud in 1955 over his shoulder, right? Whatever it is that helps you root that place in your mind. And then the same is true with dialogue for me, which is I have to hear the dialogue in my mind. It can't be wooden. They can't be sock puppets, right? They have to be themselves. And so for me, there's no alternative on that to spending a lot of time with your characters. You just have to know them. And in the same way that you probably don't have to remember your siblings or your cousins' names, I don't have to really think hard about, who Hannah Huntington is, or whichever character we're talking about. Now, my method also is a complete disaster in the sense that I probably wrote 1.2 or 1.3 million words in order to get the 285,000 that were in the final version of the Sand Sea. And so that's the iceberg principle, right? You write 90% to get that 10%, and that 90% supports that 10%, but it's all hidden beneath the surface, right? And so it makes it all very, very real because it's off camera, it's off stage. I have benefited immensely by having one of the best editors in the universe, Sean Coyne, who wrote the story grid, who created the story grid, who literally can dissect every scene, every chapter, every beat, every act, and the entire work to determine whether or not you're hitting all of the essential scenes of genre. And so when I moved the Sand Sea from this unwieldy behemoth to something that was, as Jack would say, commercial fiction viable, was when Sean Coyne flew out here and we spent like 24 hours of work sitting in a room together, literally going character by character, scene by scene, chapter by chapter, and making sure that we were hitting all of the things that we needed for all of the heroes' journeys of all of our various characters. And that we were delivering what the sort of, Jungian subconscious expects from story. And that's a deep, deep thing. And so I think you have to always hit both. You can't, and again, everyone does it differently. And I've only done one book. But for me, it was, you have to outline so that you're not trying to sail to Tahiti without a map, but you can't be so constrictive in your outline that you don't allow the characters to speak for themselves, which is what makes great dialogue and great characters.
Awesome.
That's amazing. All that 1 million something to get the 250,000 word. That's wild. So for me, nothing was really left on the cutting room floor. It was like everything that was written ended up in the novel. And I think what I owe that to
cool.
Westfield advice that I misinterpreted as to having that theme right there. So I'll come back to that theme. I was really surprised when I got to New York, especially for the first book. I thought it would come back with tons of edits and they'd make it great and all, it's Emily Bessler, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And really nothing. It was just like 3 things. Would he say this here? Would he think this here? And a third one I don't remember. Like hardly any edits at all, which really surprised me. So my process is, I guess, is a little more lean, especially knowing that you're here and you have to get these things out and you have to hit these deadlines and all that stuff. So, so far anyway, everything that has been written really ended up in the novel.
For the record, follow the Jack Carr method, not the Mike McClellan method.
I have, I'm going to add a quick questions, quick answers, because we only have a few more minutes and there's a few good questions coming your way. I want to go to Evelyn really quickly, and then I'll read the questions coming up. But Evelyn, I think you might be, as a Defense Department Pentagon official, you might have a future career as a novelist. So please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I've often thought about writing vignettes, based on going to North Korea and Yongbyon, and then some of the special ops stuff that I've been privy to. But it's just interesting listening to you guys, and obviously having some awareness of the genre, I don't know whether there have ever been any women who stand out in this field. And so, as you were saying, Jack, the guys, I thought, well, are there any women who have been writing in this field that you would guide us to? And is it basically because the experience, I know in the special ops community, obviously most of the special operators are men, although there are women. And there are certainly women supporting the special operators who could be writing in the genre. So, what are your thoughts on that? I guess I don't have a fully formulated question, but it just struck me that it's kind of a male testosterone-ish genre, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Sure.
I'm definitely curious about that. And if I don't mind adding, or if you don't mind me adding, Ellen, you both have very, very strong female characters in your books. And so how do you think about that in your writing process?
Yeah, so I'll
Fill in the
start
space with more.
Start with that one. I mean, having strong female characters, I think I didn't put thought into this as I was going. It just happened naturally because my mom is very strong, my grandmother is very strong. I just grew up surrounded by these strong women, so I naturally had them in my storyline, and two very strong female characters in the first novel. And I think that resonated with Simon & Schuster because I didn't think about this ahead of time. But when I actually got back to Simon & Schuster, walked through the building and started shaking hands and saying hi, it was predominantly female. Almost everyone I met there. And so after I left, I was like, oh, wow, to include my editor. I was like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I put those strong female characters in. And I didn't really mean to. It was just natural for me to do that. Now, the other question, so KJ Howe is an author in this genre, but you're right. There are very few female authors in this type of thriller genre. Now, there's of course there's medical thrillers, there's legal thrillers, there's the psychological thriller, there's all sorts of different kinds. But this political type thriller, there are not as many women represented. KJ Howe is one of the significant standouts, and I have her novels right over there. But if you look at the New York Times list, there are a lot of female authors on there in other genres, and I'm talking on the fiction side of the house. Of course, there's all these different lists, but look at the fiction hardcover books, and there are more females than males on that list typically. But you're right, in this particular genre, there are not that many female authors. But there's one, Christine Carbo. She's amazing, and she's created like her own type of a genre. She writes about Glacier National Park and the industry that happen out there, and she's absolutely fantastic. I love her work. She's incredible, and she's created her own genre that doesn't really fit into any specific category, which I love. But there are plenty of female authors out there, obviously. But in this particular genre we're talking about, there's Brad Thor, there's Vince Flynn, there's Daniel Silva. Like it is definitely a male-dominated political thriller genre.
Thank you. I have two other quick questions, and so I'll bounce between the two of you. Michael, Kim has a question about faith and principle. As quickly as you can, does that play a role for you in your books? Inspires the way you think about character formation.
Yes, and so one of the themes of the book, sub-themes of the book, is the confrontation of modernity against ancient wisdom, and so one of the things that we see is that the question is what endures, right, in this life and beyond, what lasts, what matters, and there's a statement at the end of the book that is that all but that which is built of the spirit is crushed into dust. Right. And I think for me, there's some people that use faith kind of as just like part of their culture. Like they use it primarily for cursing, like 3 gods, I'm pissed, whatever. But then there's those that take their faith very, very seriously, including like being willing to be burned alive at the stake in order to hold on to the truth and not sacrifice their values, their core values. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you. And then Candace has a question about, do you ever get defensive when there are things you get attached to pieces of either storylines or characters and people tell you to get rid of it? I suspect that you just power ahead.
Yeah, and I'll dig that one up. Before I gave it to anybody, I decided that, hey, if this is going out to 10 people and one of them or two of them writes back and says that they don't like this chapter or this part or whatever else, then okay. But if like 5, 6, 7 people say it, okay, now I'm gonna take a look at that, and I'm gonna seriously consider making a change.
Okay.
So it wasn't so yeah, I decided I wasn't going to take that sort of thing personally. And then when I got to New York, I had the same thing, even though not much changed. I was like, all right, this is going to one of the best editors in the world who has success with Brad Thorpe, Vince Flynn in this genre. If he wants me to add exploding robots from outer space, guess what's going in here? Exploding robots from outer space are going in. So I made that decision before I sent it off. And of course, there's no exploding robots from outer space.
I love it. Okay, and let me close with this. One is, Jack, you have in the acknowledgments in your book, Gen X and our work, and in Terminal List, you have a very aggressive forward about supporting our work on extremism. So thank you for that. And by the way, there's a fitness competition that's really a charity raising competition that the Gen X Foundation is going to be a beneficiary of. So we strongly encourage all of you to please donate to help Gen X member Todd Vandehey, because it helps go to this type of work. And I think today's the last day. Wade put it in there, so please donate. But could you guys just close with why is Gen X important? Why are you part of it?
Absolutely. So for me, it's twofold, and they're both equally important because they're both personal. And one is that we met while I was still in the military. You introduced me to this amazing group of people at Gen Next that I never would have met otherwise, that really opened my eyes and opened my aperture to what else was out there and what opportunities there were for me as I transitioned out. Now, it was nice knowing that those were there as possibilities, just in case this author thing didn't kind of work out. So I will forever be grateful for that. And then the second part of this is that having done the job that I did for so long and going back to Iraq and seeing how we can continue to go out in Mosul and Baghdad, in Ramadi and Fallujah, just like all major big city SWAT teams do almost every night of the year to serve warrants since the late 60s up to include tonight. Well, we can continue to do that forever. We can play SWAT in all these countries forever. But how do we really address those underlying conditions so that now the grandchildren, because right now, people that are joining the military and going to Afghanistan are fighting the sons of the people that we fought over there after September 11th. So how do we make sure that those people we fought in 2001, 2002, that this next generation isn't fighting their grandkids over there? How do we do that? And with Gen Next, focus on violent extremism and doing it in a way that's thoughtful, taking best practices from industry, not just the best tactical way to enter a room and put bullets into somebody, but how to really address these issues for the next generation. That is what is important. And that's why I'm such a, so devoted to you guys and the mission, and I'm always standing by to help however I can.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Michael.
Yeah, look, there's no substitute for people, right? Which is that Gen Next is the people that are part of it. And in my acknowledgments, there are a number of Gen Next members in there, lots, whether they are labeled as such or not. And those people have been with me all along the journey. And I think in the present moment, that we live in an age that seeks to polarize us based upon our belief about one thing or two things, right? What party you belong to, or what you feel about a particular issue. And the desire is not to have constructive dialogue, but to actually turn people that disagree with you into evil or into adversaries. And I think one of the things that Gen Next does is it reminds us that we are all here in community, whether we agree on every issue or not. And I think that if we are going to save this nation and save this moment in time, that we are going to require social capital organizations like Gen Next to be able to bridge divides, to be able to have discussions that lead the way forward, that don't push us towards ever escalating hostility against our fellow Americans and against our neighbors and against our community, but to be able to actually work through issues towards a better place. We can have a a hero's journey as a nation, right? Move through this chaos to an order that's better on the other side.
You guys are incredible. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, both of you. Buy the books, share it with lots of people, and we'll see you all next week. And please support Todd and Gen X. Thank you, guys. Incredible.
Take care.